Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Hello, and welcome to Reimagining Motion, a podcast from the High Volume Transport Applied Research Program, which is undertaking research into the complex and interrelated issues of sustainable transport across Africa and South Asia. The High Volume Transport Applied Research Program, or short HVT, is an £18 million investment by the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. I'm Holger Dugman, your host for today's session. Welcome to our second series, this time on climate change and transport in the context of lower income countries. It has become overwhelmingly clear that we are off track to stave off the catastrophic impact of climate change. And with transport contributing to nearly a quarter of all energy-related carbon emissions globally, it's clear that the transport sector is critical to achieving the ambitious Paris agreements. But the drive to greener transport is a complicated balance with different challenges for low-income countries compared to wealthy ones. Those countries with the least emissions are often suffering from the impact of climate change, as many extreme weather events in the last few years have shown us. In this series, we're talking to transport and climate experts, including guests from our HVT research program, to explore the opportunities and challenges that low-income countries face in mitigating emissions, adapting to the impact of climate change, and how to find a way to find a just transition to a resilient and low-carbon future. Each episode draws on the latest HVT research, case studies, and newly developed frameworks for offering insights and practical ideas for addressing climate change in the land transport sector. To help us further explore these issues, I will be speaking today with Bronwen Thornton from Walk21. She is the CEO of Walk21 and former board chair of the Partnership for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, SLOCAT. She is an international expert, facilitator, and trainer on walking and walkable communities. The work of Walk21 includes several HVT-funded projects, such as investing in walking in African cities, or also a short policy note on walking is our asset, and we will also talk with her today about that. But first, as a welcome, Bronwen, it's great to see you again. How are you doing?
Hi, Holger. Very nice to see you.
Thanks, Bronwen. Let's get into the starting. So I already introduced you, so that you are the mistress, the masters of walking. With this podcast, is really about focusing on the question of low-income countries and also the issue of inclusiveness. So, why is walking, from your perspective, key for low carbon, but particularly an inclusive transition in low middle-income countries?
It doesn't need saying, but somehow it continues to need saying, which is walking is already low carbon. It is a zero carbon mode. Even if you have occasional bits of research that try to suggest we eat more to walk more, the reality is that it is a low carbon mode. And it is an inclusive mode because it is a cost-free mode. You can walk out your front door and choose to walk in your local communities. And it's the way we interact, and it's the way we work as human beings interacting and being with each other. And it's accessible to everybody, whether you are young or old. You don't need to have a license or, as I said before, the money to choose to walk. It's the essence of how we move as people, from the very first steps we take as a child right through to the dreaded having to give it up as we get older. So particularly in low and middle income countries, though, and this is a critical factor, is the cost of travel. As a percentage of household budgets, walking doesn't cost anything. And so therefore it enables people, if we build cities where they can access their local communities locally within shorter walking distances, then people can continue to access services, work, and their communities.
But what is about us, the people who are more locked in to have us to walk in a very unsafe environment and have to walk for very long distances? So is that still really inclusive and low carbon?
Yeah, no, of course, the longer distances is not ideal. And as they call it, they're not walking by choice, but by necessity in lots of low and middle income countries. And there is certainly a lot we could do to allow people to walk less, whether it's locating their work or their services closer to where they live, or improving the public transport connections so that they can access and cover those longer distances. But it has to be shared public transport that can keep the costs down for people and not create more of the externalities and the problems that come with high levels of private motorization. And so, no, of course, for rural areas, walking is not ideal. Much longer distances, walking is not ideal. But there are so many places and cases where walking can be part of the transport, address the transport needs of people in these places, and that we should be fostering and making safe and making attractive so that it remains a mode, rather than people looking to move away from walking because of its associations, well, a lot of the time with that captivity or with that poverty. Getting a motorbike, getting a motor car is seen as a social progression. But that's understandable because the environments we ask people to walk in aren't safe or pleasant, let alone sort of inviting for them to do so or indicating any sense of value in them being out and about on foot.
There's certainly also a COP, but also globally pressures on lower income countries is to reduce their emissions, even though so the vast majority of the emissions come from the global north. And do you see that there is a risk of driving towards green transport overshadows really the needs of the most vulnerable in society and who will face those unfair conditions and access to mobility?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point. And as you said, it's the drive towards green, transport. Let's look at that, and it doesn't have to mean that. But this drive is dominated by the electric vehicle agenda, the idea that we can have the same level of, private motorization. And I'm very clear about private motorization versus public and shared mobility. This drive for electric vehicles is as much about saving the vehicle industry as it is about saving the planet. And, we have to be alert to that, because the reality is that the capacity of our cities, as they get bigger and the populations grow, we haven't got the space to accommodate that volume of traffic and transport anyway. And motorized travel displaces people on foot and makes it dangerous. Unfortunately, it shouldn't, and it doesn't have to. We can build safe streets and spaces for all modes to move. But our preference, it seems, for prioritizing motorized movement has historically done that. Now, I'm not anti-electric vehicles. Of course, we need to decarbonize the motorized, modes in our communities, but they're getting all the attention and all the money and displacing the need to build good walkable neighborhoods, streets, cities, and local opportunities. And that money and the investment is going into highways and electrification instead. And so things like the greenest modes, walking and cycling. I don't represent cycling, but they're our partner in this process. When combined with that shared or public transport, it can deliver mobility for the volumes of people that have to move around in our cities. But as long as we're focusing only on the technical electrical solutions, we're not building in those ground up street-based solutions, which is good walkable environments.
Thanks, Bronwen. So I introduced you as a CEO of Walk21. So after we covered a little bit of also the challenges, but also opportunities, particularly as in walking, tell us a little bit what Walk21 is actually doing, particularly to support also really this inclusive transition also, which is needed.
Yeah, so it's great to be doing this in the HVT context, because we did that really great piece of research, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and to really daylight the value that walking has in African cities. Now, in some communities across Africa, in very many actually, walking is up to 75% of daily trips. Now, we can argue about statistics. Some people will say, it's 40% of urban mobility, and in some places it's 75%. But what we are doing and working particularly in Africa is to daylight the importance of walking. So not just in its own right and in the movement around our cities, but in its relationship with public transport, and ensuring that when public transport systems are built, that the walking and the walkable catchments are included in the concept of what you're providing for people, that a public transport system is not just station to station, stop to stop, but it's a door-to-door experience for people, which captures the catchments. And so to achieve this, though, we are working mostly at a national government level. We're doing quite a bit of work with UN Environment and also with UN ECE across the European region, looking at national governments and how national governments can support local initiatives. Because for a very long time, they displaced their sense of responsibility for walking and walkability by saying it was local, it was up to cities and it was a local action. But national governments can set agendas, they can set the financing mechanisms, they can set the political priorities, the standards and the expectations. So we're working with national governments across Africa and across the pan-European region, so totaling about 100 countries, actually, just over 100 countries, to look at what is coherent, effective national walking policies and building that connection with their nationally determined contributions, creating those cohesive packages, and also looking at the particular on-the-street resources. So if we want people to stay on their feet, we have to know that they're satisfied with their environments. Simple things. I mean, a crossing in the right place, a controlled crossing in the right place, footpaths. Building footpaths is still a critical criteria, but not just building them, but making sure they're wide enough and making sure that they connect through to where people are needing to work. So this sort of whole systemic approach, right from national government, national global commitments, working in all these different forums, different agencies, and right down to street level engagement with people on the ground, because that's what keeps it real. If you don't actually keep that connection, we're very clear, we want to sustain that connection. And we're supporting bits of research and things as well. I mean, the list is long. I mean, I got my to-do list on the wall behind me. But it's all about positioning walking and highlighting the value and giving people the resources so that they can engage with that.
You refer to it as like the part of Walk21 doing research, and one piece was also a policy brief for high volume transport. And here you argued, and I quote here, that walking as a mode of transport in Africa is inadequately understood and planned for, invested in, and supported through policy and other measures. So that's also, that sentence was really striking for me. So, Bronwen, can you expand a little bit on that sentence, that statement?
Yeah, sure. It is a really interesting one, and it's touching on what I've been talking about already, because historically, walking just wasn't seen as a mode of transport. It was seen as a leisure activity, or it was seen as something you did to do shopping, or it wasn't even seen inside the transport agenda. I mean, when I just, on a very personal note, 30 years ago, I was working in the Department of Transport, and even getting cycling on the agenda then was a big challenge. And when I found out about Walk21 and discovered walking, I went back to them and said, oh, we need to do walking as well. They just laughed. They just didn't even see that it was relevant to an agency that built roads and bridges and highways. And unfortunately, now that's a similar idea that we are seeing. And within the sort of development of policies and transport agencies across Africa, that sort of model of looking to where you build was this focus on the motorization, on roads, on bridges, on highways. And so they didn't build in effective policies. There was no recognition of that local street level value of walking. And so we see that plays out then not only in misunderstanding the policy frameworks, but insufficient funding, biases in the way we actually evaluate transport projects, deliver cost-benefit analysis of transport projects is biased against modes like walking because of the way we value time and the way we value capacity in our systems. And so that translates through all the way down to how projects are delivered, so that when projects are running over budget, they drop out the walking facilities because they don't have any money left to build in sidewalks. So this whole idea of walking as a mode of transport, it wasn't seen in many cities and countries for a long time as a valued thing. And that translated into the African context. And then it failed to, despite the high levels of people walking, it was seen as something to build out and to build over. And so it reflects, as I said, in policy, in funding initiatives, in prioritization when it comes to delivery, and even in, through into maintenance and the quality of the realm that is there. And so when we did our piece of research for HVT, we found very low levels amongst government officers around seeing that walking was something that they should actually be designing for and investing in. And in fact, it was COVID that started to shift that perception that there was a value, that walking could be an asset, not just something to build out.
Great. So what role is that also for, what is the role also for research in that space?
Yeah, so the critical factor for research, again, and this translates into research because walking research wouldn't have been prioritized either. And so what happened, And when we did a piece of work actually with the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations and a number of academic institutions to look at the historic levels of research into active mobility and particularly into walking. And what it shows is a very strong bias in the health agendas, because the health agenda has understood the value of walking as a physical active mode for the health of our human bodies for a very long time. But there hasn't been the same level of research into walking as a mode of transport, its contribution to the transport system. It's not just a co-benefit for all the other social and health benefits, but the transport benefits of walking, and also its contribution to clean air. So you don't get that sort of evidence base, that resource that people can then draw up into government policies and draw up into actions within cities. And in fact, a lot of the impact and development of walking in communities around the world has come from the less academic dimensions of it, in terms of cities actually just doing applied interventions and evaluating their impact and it rolling out in that way. And the research agenda is now catching up with that. And also around cost benefit analysis, we did a piece of work in Europe a few years ago. It doesn't have to be academic. Research can be within these contexts, and looking at the ways that we can change those fiscal appraisal models to integrate walking. And as I said, not just the externalities, but the internalities of walking in the transport system and the contribution it makes.
Great. And coming also from these specific examples and good practices to the questions of really an enabling framework. And as you mentioned that you're working quite a lot on policy, and one of the pieces of work you recently done was a report for the high volume transport program. Our walking is our asset, and you identify 9 main actions to enable walking. I'm not testing you now as to come up with all the 9s, but can you share some highlights, some key findings when it comes to how we can really scale action on walking as an inclusive transport mode?
Yeah, sure. I've got a cheat sheet, so I would, if I had to rattle them off. Yeah, so the report we did for HVT, Our Walking is Our Asset, which you got to start in the title to tell people what you want them to say. We came up with 3 core areas to group the main actions underneath. And one of those is measurement, understanding both the data around people walking and evaluating the walking environment. The second one is governance. What are the commitments by decision makers, the multidisciplinary teams, the policy and the community engagement that they need to embed good governance for walking into the bureaucratic and policy structures? And finally, of course, resources. The funding, always more funding, but also the resources to commit to demonstration projects to actually learn and grow and build on that to continue delivering for walking across the communities.
Great, thanks also for that. One of the things I wanted to raise, and I've heard it also before from you, but I thought also that would be really interested also for all the listeners. And in terms of that, people often argue that walking does not matter as it has no economic benefit nor impact, and is often, as you mentioned also earlier, is often as ignored also in cost benefit analysis when it comes also to decision making. So what are you telling them? I know you would not agree on that, but what are you telling us that? What are the arguments against that?
Yeah, this is the hot topic. I mean, this is the big question. It's like, it doesn't have a financial basis. I mean, the challenge for walking is we don't have an industry. Even cycling has the cycling industry, sort of working and looking to increase cycling and to support, more cycling in our communities. And it has an investment model in that way, which of course, because it's so ubiquitous, everyone does it. 8 billion people on the planet now. We all need walking. And to be clear, in my definition of walking, we include people who need mobility assistance for that type of walking in terms of wheelchairs and, canes and things as well. So, but of course it does have an economic benefit. The thing is that so often the economic benefits of walking have been delivered not into the transport frameworks, but into health benefits or into local retail benefits or into, broader sort of community benefits. And government agencies are not joined up to see that if I deliver through my transport policy more people walking, then that has a benefit to the health budgets, because we don't have to spend more money making them well again. Now, in low and middle income countries, people are walking enough for their health. In fact, they probably want to walk a little bit less. So that relationship isn't as direct. But the benefits around cleaner air, lower cost to actually build walking facilities. The research clearly shows that it costs less to build walking facilities. You generate more local employment because the needs of it don't, you can engage more locally with people, that local investment. And so the value for walking rests in all these broader co-benefits, but also in the transport benefits. So the study that came through from the Washington Metro, and now this study is nearly 10 years old, but what's great to see is how that study has informed the work over the last 10 years, because what they found was that if they best buy to underpin the fiscal viability of their public transport system, to increase their ridership, to deliver a better service for their customers, was to improve safe and direct walking access to their stations. It wasn't about the station, it wasn't about the train, it wasn't about the level of the frequency of the service. It was about building those walking links to the station. And their research showed that for every 10 houses that they connected to the station, they got 7 more rides per week. So you have an immediate direct connection between the investment that you're making and the outcome in your transport budget.
So, Bronwen, we also met at COP27. You were taking part in many of the high-level events around also transport. Tell us a little bit more about your observation. What was the good, the bad, and the ugly from a transport perspective?
Yeah, it was a really interesting COP, actually. I'm starting to be a longer-term COP person. I went to Paris in the first one. And so I want to reflect on the change from Paris to Egypt. I think the essence of it is that transport is much more in the conversations now, and that's reflected in a number of things. But it felt like the conversations in the side events, in the different groupings and the different topics, from finance to gender to the relationships for active mobility with public transport, but all sorts of different conversations that I dropped in on around COP. These were strong. The collaborations between different groups, the intent and the ambition within the transport community was really clear to me. I thought it was really vibrant and ambitious and sort of constructive, like there was lots of really genuine, how do we do financing? How do we do all of these different things? And some really strong initiatives, being launched, which were really great. In the middle, in the bit where the real sort of hard negotiating decisions were being made, it wasn't so great. I mean, the headline outcome of COP is a bit weak. The ambition at those higher levels starts to get a bit soft as well, but in the side events and the strong conversations that I had, I can see the ambition there within the community, at least, to bring the solutions and to bring the change that we need. But at that political, ministerial, big picture ambition, I don't think it moved us as far along as we might have hoped from Glasgow. I mean, Glasgow, as you know, we had a transport declaration, we had a transport ministerial roundtable, and we had a transport day, which really put transport on the agenda across all of the different parameters of COP, and that felt, again, that level of conversation is strong, but the ultimate delivery and engagement wasn't quite there, I don't think.
Thanks for sharing us your observations there. So we covered a lot of ground in the podcast already, and but also just one closing question around the COP, but also feel free also to go beyond. What do you think also needs to happen? Also, we have seen also COP, but you see also that all the other activities around cities, around national governments, but what will really also help to also scale action on mitigating and adapting climate change, tackling transport, but particularly to make it also more feasible also for inclusive transport, which obviously also walking is key. So what are the key silver? We never have one silver bullet, but probably also we have a range of silver bullets you can share with us also as an outlook also for the next years.
Yeah, this is a great question. And obviously there are a lot of things that need to be done and done very quickly. But the reticence for that radical action is really holding us back. And the things where we see that scaling up, that action that needs to happen is the support for financial investment in walking and cycling. And it comes back to this national framework and the value that we've talked about, that we have to do all of those other things around fossil fuels and pricing mechanisms and the externalities and all of those things. But what we can do right now is make it safer and more comfortable for people to walk and cycle. We must continue to work to put active mobility as part of the solutions to climate change, because it does ensure, it's critical. Like we've talked about, the cost of these modes helps people not have to spend all their household budgets on transport. And if we can ensure that local access, ensure local services, make those environments safer and more attractive for people, just build sidewalks. Let's do nothing else. Let's just build sidewalks where they need to be. Every urban street should have sidewalks. And then we need the funders to have priorities. We need these multilateral development banks. We can't keep tossing responsibility back and forth from national governments who say they don't fund it to funders who say governments don't ask for it. We need clear national policies that prioritize walking within the public transport, walking, cycling mix. And we will continue to work with them to put that on the agenda. We're building a template NDC so they can get that right, link all of those things together, and then you can negotiate for the financing so that walking is part of all road projects, all public transport projects, and scaling up walking and cycling projects to the scale of investment that multilateral banks can give. And with that, you can then just get on with it. COVID showed we can move fast if we have to. And that's the sort of momentum that we need for walking and cycling to help with the climate ambitions.
Thanks, Bronwen, and I love to see your comment in terms of what we have, or we can also moving fast here, and really the inclusion of walking also from also like the very small scale also design to also the national policies and investment to also like the global commitments, as well as also the international banks also providing also the right resources, and also helping us with the capacity and the institutions. So thank you so much also for taking us your time today.
Thanks a lot, Holger. It's been really good to talk with you, and good luck with the podcast series. Thank you.
So thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to find out more about the work of our guests and any of the resources, please check out the links in the description. I also encourage you to listen to the other episodes in the series where we explore a variety of other topics related to climate change and transport. Also, you can leave us a rating, hopefully a good one, and a review. It really helps others find our podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the work of the High Volume Transport, you can check out our website at transport-links.com, or follow us on Twitter at transport_links, or on LinkedIn at High Volume Transport Applied Research Program. The High Volume Transport Applied Research Program, HVT, is an £18 million investment by the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. The program's new body of research aims to help inform decisions of policymakers in low-income countries and make road and rail transport greener, safe, and more accessible and affordable. My name is Holger Dahlmann, and you have been listening to Reimagining Motion. Thank you. Stay and travel safe wherever you are. Goodbye and auf Wiedersehen.